Good morning. Today I wanted to talk about slips, trips, and falls. What is the lawsuit value of a slip, trip, and fall case in the state of New York, especially New York City? If you or a loved one has been involved in any kind of trip and fall, slip and fall, apartment building accident, sidewalk accident, staircase accident, how much money are you going to get? This is a question that our clients constantly ask us. They really want to know. And I think the best way to start is to go through some cases. We compiled a list of cases that we've resolved either by jury verdict or by settlement in the last 5 years. And we want to go through it starting with the lowest and going up to the highest to give you the range of numbers that we've been able to secure for our clients. And so it really is going to answer the question for you, what type of slip and fall or trip and fall case is going to be worth $1 million or more? And that's where we're going to end the video. So to start, let's take this case that happened in Brooklyn. We recovered $35,000 for this lady. She was shopping in a store and she tripped and fell because of a pallet. The corner of the pallet was sticking out. So the reason it only went for $35,000 was because, number one, this lady had soft tissue injuries, and the pallet itself was just part of the store. I believe they had like pineapples stacked where people could take them and buy them on top of the pallet. The edge of the pallet was sticking out a little bit, but there was no obvious defect or danger or hazard, and so the case went for $35,000. Another case with a fracture on a trip and fall due to a ramp that was right at the edge of a curb near a restaurant. And another lady, she was walking down and she tripped and she actually broke her leg. But she only went to the doctor twice and she felt a lot better. It was casted, it healed. She didn't really have any kind of permanency. She didn't have anything where she did physical therapy, she needed surgery, nothing like that. Just 2 visits and she was fine. That case settled for $40,000. And the other reason that case didn't go for so much compensation was because it was Orange County, which is upstate, and it's considered very conservative, where jurors give less value in Orange County. The next case was a $60,000 settlement, and similarly, the lady was walking on a sidewalk. It was a raised sidewalk where one of the sidewalk flags or squares is higher than another, and she tripped. And she had a fracture, I believe, to her wrist. But here the problem was that it happened out on Long Island in Great Neck. And over there, the laws are different from New York City. In New York City, if you trip and fall on a sidewalk, you could sue the landowner, the landlord of the building in front of the defect, and you can obtain their insurance policy, which is usually $1 million or more. But out in Great Neck, they don't have those kinds of rules. So you have to sue the town of Great Neck, the town of Long Island. It's very complicated to sue governmental entities, but we were still able to recover $60,000. And the next case is a case where a gentleman was inside an office. He was actually working in a law firm as a file clerk. And during Sandy, the hurricane, it was very dark, but the office was still open and he was inside, and because of the darkness, he tripped and fell over a file, injuring his lower back. And that case settled for $100,000. The next case was a lady who went to shop at MACY'S, at a big mall shopping store, and she was trying on clothes in the dressing room. She sat in the dressing room, and while sitting on a bench, the entire bench just collapsed. She fell down, and she ended up having a bad injury to her wrist. In fact, she needed wrist surgery. That case settled for $200,000. The next case was a lady who was walking up this 3 or 4 steps in an apartment building in Brooklyn to get to the elevator to go up to her apartment. And there was a chip in one of the steps, and her foot slid down that chip and she fell. And she had a bad injury to her Achilles tendon that needed surgery. That case settled for $300,000. The next case was a driver of a limousine. He was actually going to pick up a client. And as he got to the base where the cars are parked, he had to get out of the car to get something. And as he got out of the car, it had snowed, but the night before, it had stopped snowing, I think 9 p.m. on the night before. And so there was ice just left all over that parking lot. He slipped really badly and he landed on his shoulder, and he ended up having a bad shoulder injury that also required surgery. And that case settled for $375,000. The next case was a lady who was at a Starbucks, and it was actually near the World Trade Center down in downtown Manhattan. And as she was exiting the Starbucks, she didn't realize that there was a step because it was kind of like an invisible condition. She thought that it was just one level from the Starbucks down to the sidewalk. And so she just walked right out, but there was a step, and it wasn't marked or delineated in any way. And she fell and she broke her leg really badly, needing what's known as open reduction and internal fixation. It means that the surgery has to go in and put in plates and screws to fix the fracture of the leg. And then, so that's the open reduction, and the internal fixation is the plates and screws. And then later, sometimes that hardware has to be taken out by another doctor, which is known as a revision surgery, a subsequent repair. And that case settled for $400,000. That was actually a good settlement because the case was really tough. There was no defect, like I said. It was just a normal step. It was just that we argued that the step was like an optical illusion. We had an expert. But, you know, really in Manhattan, which is also considered fairly conservative, it could have gone either way. If we would have gone to trial on that case, there's a good chance we would have gotten nothing. The next case is a gentleman who was walking down the stairs in his apartment building. In fact, what happened was his family was already down the stairs and he was walking behind them. And the step had the rubber treads on it. And one of the rubber treads just slid off the step. Obviously, the rubber treads have to be glued and attached, affixed to the step. But this one just slid right out from under him, and he fell all the way down the stairs, and he was bleeding profusely. He also had a bad shoulder injury where he needed shoulder surgery with anchors in the shoulder. And that case settled for $525,000, over $500,000. The next case is a gentleman who was on the way to work, walking on a sidewalk in northern Brooklyn in New York City. Again, it had snowed, I think, 3 days before, but that landlord of the building never cleaned the sidewalk, and he slipped on the ice and on the snow, and he had, again, an ORIF, an open reduction internal fixation, a really bad one, and he was a young guy. He was, I believe, in his early 20s. That case actually had to go to trial because the insurance company and the defendants didn't want to make a fair offer to settle, and it had to go to trial. And at trial, we won liability against the defendants, and we also were then able to secure a settlement of $550,000. And now we're getting to what I promised you at the beginning of the video, the $1 million cases. So the first one was a case, a very interesting case. A gentleman was a boiler inspector, and he goes into a cleaner's, and he says, well, I'm here to inspect your boiler pursuant to New York State rules. They have to have an annual inspection. And so the gentleman who owns the cleaners, he was a gentleman from China. He says, okay, he opens a hatch and he says, go right down. So our client, thinking that it was a staircase, starts walking down. But there was no staircase. It was just a ladder, just a regular ladder put up against the side of the side of the hatch, the open hatch. And so obviously the whole ladder falls, he falls down to the ground below, and he ends up fracturing both legs, both ankles, with open reduction internal fixation necessary in both the left and the right legs. Really, really bad injury, and that case settled for $1,250,000. The next case was a case that we have a separate video about. It was a trial that we did, a 1-month trial right before the pandemic hit. We started the trial in January of 2020, and we finished it in mid-February of 2020. And after a liability, I think just picking the jury in this case took 3 weeks. And then the trial took another week or two, calling all the witnesses, and we established some of the liability. But the case ended up settling for $1,400,000. It involved a slip and fall due to tracked-in rain on the staircase in a school. It was a tough liability case. A lot of these cases get dismissed, but we were able to win. And in that case, the client ended up having a spinal surgery with a spinal stimulator implanted. So it was a very serious injury. And the final case I wanted to discuss was a case also a trip and fall in an apartment building courtyard by an elderly lady. There was a defect. It was like a chip and a hole in the courtyard. It was it was like a broken up. It was like a sidewalk flag break with a long crack and a misleveling. And so she tripped and she fell badly, injuring her elbow. And that case ended up settling for $1,800,000, nearly $2 million. It was a bad elbow injury with multiple surgeries, I believe 5 or 6 surgeries, which ended up being almost like a total elbow replacement because of how bad the fracture was. And, you know, one way to see if a settlement is good or bad is to look at precedents. And they have some books, like, for example, there's a book known as New York Damages Awards for personal injury actions, like this. And so looking at that, you could actually look up something like elbow to see how much are people getting for elbow injuries that are really serious. And you could see here, there's a decision that a $1.5 million verdict was deemed excessive. And the plaintiff was told, now this plaintiff had a deep crushing of muscles, a degloving of the skin of the left arm, and a dislocation of the elbow, as well as a compound fracture of the left elbow. It was somebody who was hit by a bus while riding a bicycle. And so despite all these horrific injuries, the appeals court said that the $1,500,000 jury verdict was too much. They said it was against the weight of the evidence, and you have to go back and do another trial, you know, to have the jurors give you less money, or if you want, you can take $850,000. This is what the appellate court said. This is a case from a little bit back. It's from 1984. And so that so that makes us think that, you know, if we can get a settlement for $1.8 million, where appellate divisions have held that 1.5 is excessive, that means we did a pretty good job for our client. And so to finish up, to summarize, how do you know how much you can get? What are the factors that determine value with slip, trips, and fall cases in New York City? Well, the most important number one question that you have to ask is, who was at fault? What is the liability? If we can put the fault on the defendant, the person we're suing, for failing to have safety rules, right? For not being safe, for having dangers, then we stand a good shot of winning. And we also have to prove what's known as causation. We have to prove that the defendant's negligence, their failure to use reasonable care and be safe, was a substantial factor in bringing about the injury and the accident, the fall. That their lack of safety played a real effect in bringing about the injury. And one of the issues that we deal with slips, trips, and falls cases that's very, very important is the issue of notice, because we have to show that anybody who fell either complained about that condition or that the condition existed for a long time so that the defendants could find it and fix it, or that the defendants created the condition. Like, say someone is mopping and creates a puddle, and then someone falls on that puddle. The person who mopped it caused and created the dangerous condition. So we have to show one of those three, either actual notice, which is an actual complaint, or either actual notice, constructive notice, which is the fact that it existed for a long period of time, or the final one would be the caused and created scenario. But if you can't show one of those three, then you're out of luck. The case gets dismissed. And a lot of slip and fall cases do get dismissed on summary judgment, which is a motion to dismiss filed in court. The second question is, what are your damages, right? It's fair and reasonable compensation that's to be paid for your injuries, all your harms, your losses. So here you have to, of course, show your medical records, but you also have to be able to show your human story. What kind of person are you? Are you credible? Do you tell the truth? Are you likable? And can you submit family, friends, maybe community witnesses, people from work that can come into court and say, this person was able to, run before, he was running marathons, he was playing soccer, she was riding bicycles, and now after this incident, she can't do anything. And, if you really have those witnesses and you can paint that picture of who you were before and who you are now after the traumatic injury and show the difference, almost like showing two roads, right? Then you're going to get much more money, because jurors usually believe independent community witnesses. And so the third factor is, where is the lawsuit, right? Like we talked about before, if you're in the Bronx, that's much better than being in Orange County or Rockland County, which are more conservative. So it's just a question of where the accident happened or where someone who is a party to the lawsuit lives. And that's what determines venue. And then, so these are really the factors. These are the factors that determine how much cases are worth. And looking over, like I looked at a jury verdict search in Thomson Reuters, which is Westlaw, and they have jury verdicts. And one of the jury verdicts was for $8 million. And I thought, wow, $8 million for a trip and fall. And this was a 43-year-old man who sustained multiple fractures all throughout his neck. And he had paralysis and neuralgia, and he had a permanent disability. And he actually slipped and fell from a window ledge as he was hanging curtains with a little stepladder at someone's residence. And I guess the lady, the residents had a lot of insurance. He went to trial and he ended up getting $7.85 million in compensation. And it was a few years back. So that was one of the largest slip and fall verdicts that I saw. Most of the cases I looked at, especially those in 2020 and 2019, were either defense verdicts, meaning the person got nothing, or $100,000, $200,000. And most of the higher numbers that I saw were actually slip and falls, but they were by construction workers at construction sites. And those cases are different from regular slips and falls. And I'll do a video just about the labor law and construction cases separately. Those cases tend to have more value because there's a statute that protects construction workers. So I hope this has been helpful. Let us know about your case. Let us know what questions you have. But these are cases that we've had over the last 5 years, running the gamut from $35,000 as one of the lower ones up to almost $2 million for pure slip, trip, and falls on stairs, sidewalks, apartment buildings, or just on a regular floor due to various conditions. Okay, have a great day, everyone. It was really nice talking with you and giving you this information. We love sharing information and giving value to our listeners and to our clients. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.